The cameras were rolling when it happened. Bernie Sanders, the relentless voice of progressive grit, leaned forward with his trademark impatience. His question cut through the air like a blade, sharp, precise, and meant to pin Jasmine Crockett. Into a corner, he wanted numbers, details, the kind of specifics that make most lawmakers stumble. And for a moment, the room braced itself for the inevitable stammer. The awkward dodge, the political slip-up Sanders, was so skilled at exposing. But then silence. Not from her, but from him. Crockett's reply was swift, surgical, and laced with a clarity that stunned even her critics. Her words didn't just answer the question, it dismantled the trap. Each syllable landed with the kind of force that makes time slow down. The audience shifted in their seats. Phones tilted up to record. Reporters' pens froze mid-scribble. And Bernie Sanders, the man who had steamrolled senators, cabinet members, and CEOs alike, sat back quiet. The chamber went silent. No one expected her to say that. What makes a moment unforgettable isn't just the clash of words. It's the shock of seeing the balance of power tilt in real time. Here was a young congresswoman, still new to Washington's brutal theater, matching wits with a titan of the progressive movement. For one fleeting but unforgettable instant, the unshakable seemed shaken. How could a freshman lawmaker flip the script on one of America's toughest political voices? How could someone, dismissed by pundits as too green, turn a grilling into a victory lap? These are the questions that sent clips of the exchange ricocheting across social media, replayed in slow motion, analyzed frame by frame, dissected like a championship fight. And yet, what viewers saw in that viral moment was only the surface. Beneath it ran deeper stakes questions of identity, credibility, generational power. And who gets to speak with authority in the halls of American politics? Because this wasn't just a debate over policy. It was a battle over dignity. It was the kind of clash that reveals more about the people involved than any soundbite could capture. And it left a mark that neither Sanders nor Crockett could ever walk away from unchanged. But to understand why this clash mattered, we need to go back to the beginning. To understand the weight of this moment, you have to first understand the man who asked the question. Bernie Sanders isn't just another senator with a microphone. For decades, he has built his reputation on one thing: never letting anyone off easy. Whether it's Wall Street executives squirming under his glare or presidential hopefuls sweating on a debate stage, Sanders has always been the relentless interrogator, the progressive pit bull who doesn't let go until the truth is dragged out into the light. His questions are weapons, and his audience knows it. And when Bernie presses, people expect cracks to show. They expect hesitation. They expect collapse. Now imagine being Jasmine Crockett, a freshman lawmaker barely settled into Washington's cold machinery. To some, she was little more than a headline. The loud new congresswoman from Texas, the rookie who didn't know her place. Dismissed as style over substance, written off as too brash, too young, too inexperienced to spar with the old guard. The pundits didn't take her seriously. Some colleagues barely bothered to hide their condescension. For them, Crockett wasn't a threat. She was an easy target. And yet, that was the stage being set. On one side, a titan white-haired battle-tested, armed with decades of credibility. On the other, a rising star-black female, unapologetic, carrying the grit of courtroom battles and the scars of political fights in Texas, where she had been underestimated before. It wasn't just a policy exchange. It was a collision of generations, of identities, of two very different brands of progressive fire. That's why the stakes couldn't have been higher. Sanders wasn't just pressing for policy details. He was defending the credibility of his movement, the torch he'd carried for half a century. And Crockett wasn't just answering for herself. She was answering for every voice dismissed, every woman told to stay quiet, every lawmaker underestimated because they hadn't yet paid their dues. The cameras caught it all. Sanders leaning in, voice rising, demanding precision. Crockett steady, eyes locked, her demeanor calm, but her pulse unmistakably alive with the magnitude of the moment. Around them, the chamber was charged, almost electric. This wasn't just politics. This was theater, and the audience was waiting for the climax. For Sanders, this was supposed to be routine. Ask a tough question, get a shaky response. Prove. The point for Crockett, though, it was anything but routine. She knew that one wrong step would feed into every stereotype her critics lobbed at her, that she wasn't ready, that she was just another voice of outrage without substance. But if she handled it right, if she landed the counterpunch cleanly, the story would change. And that's the thing about political moments like these. They don't just test knowledge, they test character, they test composure, they test whether someone belongs in the arena or is destined to be chewed up by it. This wasn't going to be a polite Q&A. Some forgettable exchange tucked away in a hearing transcript. What was about to unfold would become a defining moment in Crockett's career, the kind of viral flashpoint that cements reputations and rewrites narratives. It would be a duel where dignity, identity, and grit were all on the line, and the stakes were higher than anyone realized. To call Bernie Sanders a seasoned politician is to understate the obvious. He is an institution unto himself, a man whose gravelly voice and pointed gestures have become as recognizable as the ideals he has championed for nearly half a century. From the streets of Burlington to the floor of the United States Senate, Sanders has built his identity on persistence and yielding. It's unapologetic and famously uncompromising. He has never been one for subtlety. Sanders doesn't circle politely around an issue. He storms at it head-on, wielding statistics and moral urgency like a hammer. His passion is legendary, his impatience just as much. Supporters admire his refusal to bow to political fashion. Critics accuse him of being overbearing. Both agree. When Bernie Sanders presses you, there's no escape hatch. It's a reputation forged in countless hearings and debates. Corporate executives, defense contractors, and government officials have all sat under his glare, squirming as he demanded answers they weren't prepared to give. He doesn't soften his blows. He doesn't pad his questions with niceties. He delivers them the way a prosecutor would deliver an indictment. Sharp, rapid, leaving no room for maneuver. For many progressives, this has made Sanders a folk hero. Tireless crusader who calls out hypocrisy and corruption wherever it hides. Clips of him thundering against billionaires and pharmaceutical CEOs rack up millions of views online. His most loyal supporters speak of him with reverence, pointing to his consistency, his refusal to sell out, his determination to keep the political conversation grounded in working-class struggles. But there's another side to this reputation. The same relentlessness that inspires his base can make him a nightmare for those on the receiving end. Sanders does not easily yield. He interrupts. He corrects. He insists, often in ways that leave his opponents rattled, if not outright humiliated. In debates, he overwhelms with sheer volume, his words rushing like a flood, washing over weaker voices until they drown. It's not corruption that gives him this power, it's confidence, experience, and an aura that tells everyone in the room, I've been doing this longer than you've been alive. Social media has long reveled in this aspect of his persona. Clips circulate with captions like, "Bernie doesn't play," or "Bernie grilling another corporate puppet." Commentators praise his refusal to let anyone off easy, framing it as proof of his authenticity. It's Bernie being Bernie. One cable anchor chuckled after he verbally dismantled a Wall Street. "CO, he's not here to make friends, he's here to make a point." And that's what makes his confrontation with Jasmine Crockett so compelling. Because on paper, this wasn't supposed to be a fair fight. On one side was the elder statesman, a master interrogator with decades of credibility and a global following. On the other was a freshman lawmaker, still carving out her identity, carrying both the burden of her identity and the skepticism of an establishment that doubted her readiness. Sanders was the immovable object, the figure whose very presence seemed designed to remind Crockett and everyone watching that she was stepping into a space governed by veterans who had earned their stripes. His role in this story isn't that of a villain by corruption, but of a Goliath by stature, the unrelenting, dowering force who has toppled many before her simply by doing what he does best, pressing harder, faster, louder than anyone else. On the stage, and if history was any guide, the outcome seemed predictable. Countless opponents had faced this same fire and faltered. Even seasoned politicians had stumbled under Sanders' relentless interrogation, caught off guard by his ability to cut through the noise and hammer the same question until his adversary had no ground left to stand on. That's why the atmosphere in the chamber was so charged. Viewers knew Sanders' style. They'd seen it before. The question wasn't whether he would press hard. It was how long it would take before Crockett cracked. On Twitter, the expectation was already being framed. Bernie's about to eat her alive. One user posted as the hearing went live. Another quipped, "This won't last 10 minutes." Commentators on cable networks spoke with the same certainty. She's talented, but she's going up against a master. He knows how to corner people. The narrative seemed written before the first question even left his lips. Sanders was the interrogator. Crockett was the subject. He was the veteran, she the rookie. And in Washington, rookies rarely survive unscathed. But narratives are fragile things. They can crumble in an instant, rewritten by the power of a single, unexpected response. And on this day, Sanders was about to encounter something he hadn't planned for. Not a shaky answer, not a fumbled dodge, but a counterstrike delivered with precision and poise. Bernie Sanders was the towering figure, the unyielding Goliath. The man whose reputation alone could silence a room, but Crockett wasn't about to be steamrolled. To understand why Jasmine Crockett didn't back down, you have to know where she came from. Her story doesn't begin in the marble halls of Washington. It begins in Texas, hard, unforgiving Texas, where politics can feel like a blood sport and where a young black woman daring to demand respect is often met with open hostility. Crockett's roots are stitched with struggle and determination. She didn't come into politics through dynastic connections or wealthy benefactors. She came through the courtroom as a public defender, standing up for people who had nothing but their voices, and even those voices were often ignored. Day after day, she faced clients society had already written off: the poor, the marginalized, the ones the system chewed up and spat out. For Jasmine, their stories weren't case files, they were human lives. And in fighting for them, she built her armor, forged from late nights, long odds, and the bitter taste of injustice that work shaped her. In a profession where young attorneys often burn out or bend to survive, Crockett sharpened her edge. She became known for her refusal to accept easy losses, for digging until she found the detail that could shift a case, for standing firm even when the odds were stacked 100-1. She learned early that power doesn't respect weakness, and so she refused to be weak. When she entered the Texas legislature, the mockery began almost immediately. Her outspokenness was labeled aggressive. Her refusal to back down was called disrespect. She was told to calm down, to wait her turn, to temper her passion if she wanted to be taken seriously. But Jasmine Crockett has never been in the business of waiting her turn. Instead, she leaned into the storm. She fired back when colleagues insulted her. She used her voice even louder when they told her to quiet down. Every time they tried to diminish her, she grew. For her supporters, she became a symbol. They saw in her the reflection of their own lives. People underestimated, people silenced, people who had to fight twice as hard for half the recognition. She wasn't polished in the way Washington prefers. She was raw, fiery, authentic-hand. That was her power, critics scoffed. They called her grandstanding, said she lacked the depth to last. But with every attack, Crockett grew sharper. With every insult, she doubled down. Where others wilted under ridicule, she drew strength from it. It was a lesson she had carried from her days in the courtroom. When you're underestimated, you have an advantage. Because while your opponents are busy dismissing you, you're busy preparing to strike. And that's what made her arrival in Congress so electric. She carried with her not just the experience of law and legislation, but the scars of every battle she'd fought on behalf of those overlooked by the system. To many who watched her rise, she wasn't just a politician. She was proof that grit, truth, and unapologetic defiance could still carve out space in a system designed to push voices like hers to the margins. In Washington, her presence was disruptive in the best way. While some of her colleagues measured their words with poll-tested precision, Crockett spoke plainly. She didn't wrap her convictions in consultant-approved language. She told the truth as she saw it, sharp and unfiltered. In an era where voters are starved for authenticity, that kind of courage is a currency more valuable than any campaign check. This is what made her confrontation with Bernie Sanders so charged. He wasn't just another senator testing her knowledge. He was the embodiment of the establishment's skepticism toward her generation, her style, and her substance. For Sanders, pressing her was about policy. For Crockett, answering was about survival, identity, and dignity. It was about proving that she wasn't just another face in the crowd, but a force who could hold her ground against anyone. Even the lion of the progressive movement himself, her journey made her ready. Texas had taught her how to take a punch. The courtroom had taught her how to turn weakness into strength. The legislature had taught her that sometimes the loudest voice in the room is the only thing that breaks through. So when Sanders leaned forward, when his voice sharpened, when his eyes locked on her with that familiar intensity, she did not shrink. She had been underestimated too many times before to let it happen again, and the moment wasn't just about her. It was about everyone watching who had ever been told they didn't belong, everyone who had ever been dismissed as unqualified, everyone who had been talked over and told to wait their turn. Crockett carried their voices with her into that chamber. Her answer wasn't simply hers, was theirs, which is why the silence that followed carried so much weight. Because in that silence, something shifted. A freshman lawmaker had matched one of the toughest interrogators in politics, and for the first time, the Goliath didn't have a comeback. And when Bernie pressed her on the one issue others had stumbled over, she didn't flinch. The stage was set, and every eye in the chamber knew exactly what they were about to witness. Bernie Sanders, never one to waste time, launched into his first line of questioning with the precision of a veteran litigator. His voice, gravelly but commanding, cut through the chatter. He wasn't interested in broad themes or soaring rhetoric. He wanted numbers, details, the kind of hard specifics that had undone more experienced lawmakers than Jasmine Crockett. What is the projected cost of your proposal over 10 years? How do you intend to offset those expenditures without raising taxes on the middle class? His words rattled like a drumbeat. Fast, relentless, demanding. Crockett didn't blink. She leaned slightly forward, hands clasped, her gaze steady. Every syllable Sanders delivered landed like a strike, but her body language betrayed no panic. She listened, measured, weighed each word, almost as if she'd been waiting for this exact moment. The air thickened. Sanders leaned forward. Crockett's eyes narrowed. Cameras zoomed in, eager to catch the slightest flicker of doubt on her face. Across the chamber, staffers and onlookers shifted uneasily in their seats. This was Sanders in his element, pressing, probing, circling like a veteran fighter who knew exactly where to land the next blow. Can you guarantee that this won't add to the deficit? Can you guarantee that ordinary families won't bear the brunt of the cost? Can you explain why experts in your own party have expressed concerns about the viability of this? Each question was meant to corner her, to box her in, until she had no way out but retreat. That was Sanders' method: apply pressure, keep the spotlight glaring, and wait for the cracks to show. But Crockett's calm was disarming. She didn't rush to answer. She let his words hang in the air, drawing out the tension, making the silence work for her instead of against her. For a split second, it seemed as though she might falter.
Yes.
Sanders pressed again, louder this time, his hand slicing. Through the air, as though to demand submission, around them, the atmosphere grew electric. You could almost hear the collective inhale of the audience, as though the entire room was leaning forward together, desperate to see if the rookie would stumble like so many before her. But instead of breaking, Crockett adjusted her posture, her expression firming into resolve. Her eyes met his, unwavering. She was no longer simply listening. She was preparing. It was a duel now. Clash not of fists, but of intellect, composure, and willpower. Sanders' voice carried the weight of decades, the accumulated authority of a man who had stared down presidents and CEOs. Crockett's silence, her steady gaze, carried something different. the weight of every battle she had fought to simply be heard. The contrast was striking. One embodied history, the establishment, the unshakable force of a movement that had shaped progressive politics for decades. The other embodied defiance, the insurgent energy of a new generation unwilling to bow, willing to wait for permission. And yet both understood what was happening. This wasn't just a policy exchange. It was theater. It was a test of dominance. Everyone in the room knew the outcome would reverberate far beyond those walls. Sanders sharpened his attack, his voice rising, body leaning further across the desk, as though to close the distance and pin her down. Answer the question, Congresswoman. Right here, right now. How does your plan work? The American people deserve to know. Gasps rippled across the chamber. Porters scribbled faster. Tension broke into nervous whispers in the back rows. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath, desperate to capture the moment. And Crockett, she didn't flinch. Her eyes locked on his, steady as stone. It was clear now she hadn't been caught off guard, that she had been waiting. And then came the question that left no room for escape. And then it came. The kind of question designed not just to test knowledge, but to expose weakness. Sanders' voice cut through the chamber with surgical precision. Congresswoman Crockett, he began, eyes narrowed, hands slicing through the air. Your proposal calls for billions in new investments in housing, healthcare, and education. But let's be honest with the American people. The Congressional Budget Office has raised concerns about sustainability. The numbers don't add up. If you can't guarantee that your plan won't balloon the deficit, if you can't explain right now in detail how you'll finance it, without burdening the middle class, then isn't it just another empty promise? The words hit like a hammer. A technical question, financial trap. The kind of moment designed to force a stumble, to draw a nervous laugh or a flimsy talking point. Sanders had used this tactic for years. Drill down into the numbers, expose the gaps, and watch as the carefully built facade collapsed under the weight of precision. The room stilled. Pens froze mid-stroke. Camera lights burned hotter. The silence grew unbearable. Crockett did not answer immediately. Let the moment linger, let the tension swell, until every heart in the room seemed to beat in rhythm with the pause. Sanders leaned back slightly, almost smirking, as if he'd already won, and then she spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, but laced with a quiet fire. Senator Sanders, with all due respect, you're asking me to explain something that's working. Families already understand better than anyone in this room. They know what it means when healthcare costs swallow their paychecks. They know what it means when rent eats half their income. They know what it means when their kids' schools are underfunded. And they also know the truth. America doesn't have a deficit problem. America has a priority problem. A ripple went through the chamber. Heads lifted, eyes sharpened. Reporters' hands, frozen for a moment, now scrambled across notepads. She continued, her cadence building, her words crisp. We always find money when it's time to fund tax breaks for the wealthy. We always find money when it's time to pour billions into defense contracts. We never ask those corporations if the numbers add up. We never tell them the plan is too ambitious. But when it comes to investing in ordinary Americans, suddenly the budget becomes sacred scripture. Senator, I reject that hypocrisy. Gasps echoed from the back rows. Staffer coughed awkwardly, trying to mask the noise. Sanders' eyes narrowed further, his pen tapping against the desk. But he didn't interrupt. Crockett leaned forward now, her voice sharpening with precision. As for the deficit, let's talk facts. The Congressional Budget Office also reports that closing loopholes for multinational corporations, reinstating fair taxation on the wealthiest 1%, and reining in unchecked subsidies would cover the cost of this proposal several times over. This isn't theory, it's math. We've chosen year after year to protect billionaires instead of families. My plan flips that choice. The air cracked with electricity. Sanders opened his mouth as if to interject, but stopped. The rhythm of Crockett's words, the undeniable clarity of her evidence, had landed clean. She pressed on. You ask if I can guarantee the middle class won't bear the brunt. I can, because the brunt has already been on them for decades. They've carried this country while billionaires have carried loopholes. And the moment we decide to fix it, the numbers aren't the problem, the willpower is. My plan is about priorities. And I refuse to apologize for putting working families first. Silence. Not the silence of confusion. Not the silence of missed opportunity. It's the silence of a room holding its breath. The silence of people realizing they had just witnessed something rare. A politician who didn't dodge, didn't stumble, didn't hedge. She confronted the challenge head and flipped it. One reporter whispered under his breath, "Oh my God." A staffer mouthed a silent wow. And Bernie Sanders, the lion of progressive politics, the man who had reduced titans to rubble with his interrogations, leaned back in his chair and for once had nothing to say. The camera caught it all. His lips pressed tightly, his hand frozen mid-gesture. His eyes fixed on her with a mixture of surprise and reluctant respect. For the first time in that chamber, the unyielding Goliath had been stopped in his tracks, not by bluster, but by precision, truth, and grit. Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She didn't bask in the silence. She simply sat there, steady and unshaken, her answer hanging in the air like a banner. The victory wasn't just in the words she spoke, it was in the composure she carried, the way she embodied dignity, even in the face of one of the toughest political interrogators alive. Across social media, clips of the exchange would soon explode. But in that moment, inside that room, there was only the sound of stunned silence. Sanders' legendary persistence had met its match. The rookie had answered not just with facts, but with fire. The duel was over, at least for that round. Everyone knew who had landed the blow. But the clash didn't end in that room. It rippled far beyond. The silence didn't last long. In the chamber, the pause was heavy, reverent, like the moment after a lightning strike, when the air's still. Crackles. But outside those walls, the shockwaves traveled fast. Within minutes, phones lit up, notifications poured in, and the political world was ablaze. Reporters, stunned by what they had just witnessed, scrambled to push their alerts. Headlines raced across news sites. Crockett stuns Sanders with defiant counterpunch. Freshman lawmaker leaves veterans speechless. Cable networks cut into their programming with breaking news banners, looping the clip again and again. Sanders pressing, Crockett waiting, and then that sharp, unflinching answer. On social media, it was wildfire. The hashtag appeared almost instantly. Hashtag Crockett vs. Sanders. By the end of the night, it was trending #1 nationwide. Clips circulated with captions like, "Did you see that?" And she just ended the conversation. Memes exploded. Split-screen images of Sanders' frozen face contrasted with Crockett's unshakable stare. Viral TikTok remixed the moment into a boxing ring montage, Crockett delivering the knockout punch. But it wasn't just the spectacle. It was the symbolism. For years, Bernie Sanders had embodied the progressive bulldog unyielding, sharp, impossible to corner. And now, here was Jasmine Crockett, a freshman lawmaker from Texas, matching him blow for blow, and, in that instant, surpassing him. The generational shift wasn't just whispered anymore. It was on full display. Supporters flooded the internet with declarations of pride and joy. "That's my congresswoman," one tweeted with fire emojis. Another wrote, "Bernie's a legend, but Jasmine just showed us the future." Someone else clipped her line about priorities. "America doesn't have a deficit problem. America has a priority problem." And within hours, it became a rallying cry, plastered on digital posters, Instagram stories, and grassroots newsletters. In living rooms across the country, people replayed the moment. Families who had long felt invisible saw themselves reflected. In her composure, young progressives, often accused of being idealistic dreamers, saw validation in her precision. Immigrant parents, watching with quiet pride, whispered to their children, "Look, this is what it means to stand tall." Commentators piled on. One CNN analyst said, "This wasn't just an answer. This was a turning point." Sanders didn't get silenced because he lost his edge. He got silenced because Crockett had the courage to sharpen hers. Miss NBC replayed the clip on loop, calling it the exchange of the year. Even conservative outlets, while dismissive. Couldn't resist highlighting the viral storm, yet beneath the frenzy of retweets and soundbites was something deeper. The recognition of a baton being passed, however reluctantly, Saunders represented. A generation that had carried the torch of progressive politics through decades of uphill battles. Crockett represented a new wave, bolder, more diverse, unapologetically tied to communities long overlooked. Her rise wasn't just about policy. It was about identity, about voice, about saying, we belong here. We won't be silenced. And still, not everyone celebrated. Some Sanders loyalists bristled. They accused the media of overstating the moment, of trying to pit allies against each other. They reminded anyone who'd listened that Sanders had built the stage on which Crockett now stood. But even they couldn't deny the optics. Bernie Sanders, master of interrogation, had asked his toughest question, and Jasmine Crockett had answered in a way that left him visibly stunned. The clash became a prism refracting different meanings depending on who was watching. To the young activists, it was proof their voices could not only enter the halls of power, but dominate them, do the establishment. It was a warning. The next generation wasn't just waiting in the wings, they were already on stage, commanding the spotlight. By midnight, the clip had been viewed over 10 million times across platforms. Hashtag spawned sub-#TAJess-priority problem. Hashtag mic drop moment. Hashtag Crockett 2028. Comment sections overflowed with variations of the same sentiment. Did you see that? She didn't flinch. This is history. This is the moment everything changes. But perhaps the most telling reactions weren't in the memes or the headlines. They were in the quiet conversations sparked by her words. People who had never tuned into budget debates were suddenly asking questions. Families who rarely watched hearings were sharing links with friends. The silence that Sanders gave and the power with which Crockett filled it was now echoing in kitchens, classrooms, and community centers. It was more than a viral clip. It was a cultural jolt. A reminder that the story of America was still being written and new authors were picking up the pen. And yet, the most powerful part of this exchange wasn't the silence. It was what it revealed. In the days that followed, the noise around the exchange reached a fever pitch. But beneath all the chatter, something quieter and far more powerful was taking shape. What the world had witnessed was not just a sparring match between two progressives. It was a reminder of something bigger. Politics at its core isn't about age, hierarchy, or seniority. It's about truth, clarity, and the courage to represent the people who sent you to fight on their behalf. Jasmine Crockett didn't win that moment because she outshouted Bernie Sanders. She won because she stood in the storm and chose honesty over hesitation, conviction over calculation. In an arena where so many bend under pressure, she became a symbol of what it looks like to face power with dignity and still refuse to back down. For progressives, the clash felt less like a battle between rivals and more like a story told. In 2 chapters, Bernie Sanders embodied the first. Decades of grinding against the political machine, calling out inequality long before it was popular. He carved the path, often alone, insisting that justice was worth the fight. But Crockett now represents the second, a new wave that takes that torch and runs forward with it. Bolder, sharper, unafraid to confront even the allies who built the stage. That's the lesson so many missed at first glance. Sanders wasn't humiliated, he was humanized. Even giants must yield when confronted with truth spoken plainly. His silence wasn't defeat, it was acknowledgement. An acknowledgement that the work he had carried for years was no longer his alone. The movement had grown. The torch was no longer just in his hand. It was in hers. And this is why the moment resonated so deeply. It wasn't about policy minutia or parliamentary maneuvers. It was about the courage to tell the truth, in front of cameras, under fire, without flinching. It was about a black woman from Texas, standing tall in a chamber that was never designed. With her in mind and showing that grit, clarity, and representation can silence even the loudest voices. For every viewer who felt unseen in politics, her poise was a form of validation. For every immigrant family who believed their struggles would never make it into the halls of Congress, her words were proof that their stories mattered. For every young activist who wondered if courage still had a place in Washington, her response was the answer: yes, it doesn't. It changes everything. The moral is simple, but timeless. Power doesn't belong only to the ones who have been there the longest. Authority doesn't come from years served, but from truth delivered with courage. And when truth speaks with courage, even the strongest walls crack, even the fiercest voices quiet. Even the most seasoned figures must step back and listen. That's why the moment wasn't just a flash of political drama. It was a turning point, a glimpse of the future. A reminder that leadership is not inherited, is earned one act of bravery at a time. And that's why this moment will be remembered long after the cameras stopped rolling. You've just witnessed the moment that turned heads across the nation. Bernie Sanders pressing Jasmine Crockett with the kind of hard-edged question that usually leaves lawmakers scrambling.
Ow.
But instead of faltering, she delivered the sharp answer that left him silent. A silence that wasn't weakness, but recognition. A silence that told us all, courage can cut deeper than intimidation. This clash wasn't just about two politicians at a table. It was about what politics should be: a contest of truth, not titles. Crockett showed that when you stand rooted in conviction, you don't have to bow to hierarchy. She proved that even a freshman lawmaker can hold her ground against one of the toughest voices in American politics, and, in doing so, she gave voice to millions who were tired of being told to wait their turn. That's the heart of this story. Courage is contagious. Courage is what shifts movements, what makes history bend toward justice, what takes a moment in a hearing room and transforms it into a symbol of hope. And now, the question isn't just, what happened in that chamber? The question is, what happens next? If you believe courage in politics matters more than status, share this video. Let others see what it looks like when truth stands taller than intimidation. And if you want to be part of a community that refuses to stay silent, hit subscribe. Because this is just the beginning, and together, we can make sure voices like Jasmine Crockett's are never drowned out. This wasn't just an exchange, it was a reminder. When courage speaks, even giants go quiet. And that's why this moment will echo far beyond the silence.